Hello, and thanks for listening to Forward, a podcast about the compelling stories, important issues, and memorable art that move us. My name is Mari.
And my name is Christopher.
Thanks for joining us this week.
Today, in the wake of the Parkland shooting and the ongoing discussion about gun control and mental health, we're going to talk about how schools can better help kids with behavior issues. But before that, we'll kick things off with our Article Forward segment, where we each share one story that made us think this week. Mari, what article do you have for us?
So this was an op-ed in the New York Times either earlier this week or last week. It's written by Michael Ian Black, the comedian. It's called The Boys Are Not All Right. And it was also, as we said, in the wake of the Parkland shooting, a lot of writers have been dissecting the shooting from different angles, whether it's gun control, mental health support, school discipline, whatever, like lots of different angles on it. But Michael Ian Black was looking at it from the perspective of masculinity and how the way American boys are taught to be men is hurting them. So his point of view is that over the past few decades, what it means to be a man has become sort of unclear for young boys who are growing up, as these sort of stereotypical tropes of manliness like strength and aggression and competitiveness are starting to fall out of favor. But at the same time, boys are still not being taught to, share their feelings and be expressive and be sensitive and be empathetic and be vulnerable and just understand their feelings. So they're kind of stuck in this in-between where they are afraid that if they, express their feelings and they feel vulnerable and they act vulnerable, they are less of a man or become emasculated. But at the same time, many boys are just, they don't feel competitive or aggressive by nature. And a lot of, young men feel that that's not acceptable behavior anymore. And so they don't really know how to express their masculinity. And so for many young men, this becomes just very confusing and they're not able to express their masculinity in a productive and healthy way. And that's when they start isolating themselves or they start becoming overly aggressive or, violent and controlling and abusive. And it's these types of individuals who end up being in these violent situations. So basically what Michael Ian Black is saying is that a lot of the root problem with the mass shooting epidemic in this country is how we're teaching masculinity. And he hopes that as we move forward, we can start teaching boys how to be, and feel confident in their masculinity without feeling like they need to have power over other people and control other people and be violent. So it's really interesting, really quick read. So again, this is an op-ed from the New York Times. It's by Michael Ian Black. It's called The Boys Are Not All Right. If you're interested in this topic, there's actually also a documentary called The Mask You Live In. It's on Netflix. Excellent documentary, really gets into a lot of what Michael Ian Black is talking about, but in a lot more depth about how masculinity is taught and performed in America and how it can be really destructive and really hurtful to boys and men. So really interesting topic, definitely something that everybody should read and think about.
Totally agree. Read that article and watched the documentary. Both are great.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going with something a bit lighter this week. My recommendation is called With Great Power Comes Great Uncertainty, which is an article in Vox about the slowly evolving politics in Marvel's superhero movies. It's probably my favorite analysis to date of them. So the author, Todd Vanderwerf, traces the political and cultural overtones in Marvel's movies from the first Iron Man movie to the latest Black Panther. And it's this detailed analysis that one would use on like a classic English novel, but it's applied to this movie series that is just kind of a big popcorn movie, and it's been with us for a decade. So if you're a big superhero movie fan or just looking for a cool perspective on these movies that kind of have started to all run together, I would definitely recommend giving it a read.
Cool. I'll check that out. And both of these links will be in the description on SoundCloud, so you can check them out. So again, mine was The Boys Are Not All Right. That's an op-ed from the New York Times. Christopher's was With Great Power Comes Great Uncertainty, Marvel's Slowly Evolving Politics.
Next up is the main segment of our podcast, which we call Forward Thinking. In this segment, we dig deeper into one topic that's been on our minds this week. This episode, the topic of discussion is our nation's schools and what they can do to better help kids with behavior problems. In addition to reigniting the debate around gun control, the horrible shooting in Parkland again demonstrated the destructive outcomes that can happen from chronic mental health issues. Issues that, in most cases, can be prevented if people get access to help. The school system is in perhaps one of the best positions to help children and teens right as they're starting to exhibit behavior problems and mental health issues. They could start to address the issues long before they become something more difficult to repair. So what's standing in their way? Mari, I'm going to kick this over to you first. How do you think schools could better help kids who are having behavior problems and maybe are starting to show signs of mental health issues?
So I think for a little bit of context, it's helpful to know that in the U.S., any child who is diagnosed with an intellectual disability or a learning disability or any other sort of like diagnosable issue that could interfere with your learning is entitled to services, whether that's like some sort of therapy or it's an aid in the classroom or special ed classes or whatever. They're entitled to that under federal law. There's also something called early intervention, which is for children who are like birth to 3. It's the same thing. If they're diagnosed or they're they're flagged as potentially having some kind of delay, like developmental delay or intellectual disability, their families are entitled to in-home visits from therapists. It varies from state to state, but you're entitled to these services. Part of the problem is finding kids who have these problems and getting the right diagnosis, because that is depending on where you go and even like depending on the culture of like the family and the community or various other barriers with the family being able to get to a doctor or the family just not wanting a diagnosis for their child. A lot of different problems with like actually being able to get a diagnosis and getting the correct diagnosis. But then once you have a diagnosis, actually getting the services that you're entitled to is another huge hurdle, especially with public schools not getting the funding that they really need. And like I said, just barriers for families like getting to, therapy or getting to their doctor or whatever. There are just lots of barriers for that. So that's a big sort of thing to be aware of with this is just in early childhood, there's a huge problem with like kids being identified and also getting the services that they need.
Well, it's actually funny you bring that up because as you were talking about how to best identify kids who have these issues, I was kind of thinking about my own behavior as a kid. And I was thinking about maybe in like first, second, and third grade when I was more like the class clown, like acting out, just wanted attention. And I'm sure my teachers are probably like, Chris is a huge pain in the butt. And why is he always causing these problems? And I feel like I just grew out of that. And at the time, it was never obviously thought to be anything more. And it really wasn't in the sense it's just kind of something I grew out of. But, it's like, where do you draw the line? How do you know what's an issue and what isn't? And, I think the only other thing, even I was just talking with a friend maybe last week about just the dumb stuff we did as boys in high school, just blowing stuff up, like shooting paintball guns at, like empty cans and things like that. Just like doing like weird bouts of, it's not violence, but just like strange aggression. Like to us, it was just like having a good time, but to someone else, they're like, these kids are freaking weird.
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting point to bring up. And I think there are kind of 2 points to go along with that. One is you said like, where do you draw the line, right? And if you're an experienced teacher and you kind of know the symptoms of, diagnosable issues that people can have. And also you just kind of know like what the typical spectrum is for like behavior and like emotional problems and stuff like that. You know when something is a real problem or if someone's just goofing off. But also I think it's important for any behavior that's like disruptive or annoying or whatever, it's important for a teacher to be able to like look underneath it and see like, okay, why is he doing this? And so probably for your teachers, they realized, oh, he's just goofing around. I'm just going to ignore him and he'll eventually stop. Right? Is that mostly what happened?
Well, yeah, I either feel like I was ignored and kind of just would like sit there and do nothing, or just kind of keep being annoying, or they would just like send me to the principal's office.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, get the kid out of here.
Well, and that brings me to my other point, which is that a lot of the time for like behavior issues like that, things that maybe aren't that serious, and then things ranging to things that are actually very serious, like violence and unpredictable behavior, a lot of the time what the response is to take the child out of the classroom or even take the child out of the school, because the teacher is at their wit's end and they don't know how to deal with it. And so basically their mindset is, I need to keep teaching this class. This kid is preventing me from teaching this class, so I'm just going to get this kid out of here. And that's understandable when you're one teacher and you have like 30 students and you just need to move it along because you have certain benchmarks that you need to hit every quarter, and you're being evaluated on that, and the school is getting funding based on that in some cases. And so you understand kind of that mindset. But the problem with taking a kid out of class or taking a kid out of school is that that's time that they're spending not learning. And especially for you, or someone like you, when you're like goofing around in class, what were you trying to do? You're trying to get attention.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think in those moments I wanted two things. Like, one, I always want a little extra attention. I mean, come on, who doesn't?
Who doesn't?
Like, I feel like when I was in first, second, and third grade, I really only wanted the one thing everyone wants. I wanted to be cool. And so I'm just like, if I could just be a little bit cooler, I would get more attention. And when you're a boy, again, in first, second, and third grade, being cool is not caring. I mean, that's what actually being cool is anytime.
For everybody, yeah.
So I was like, if I just look like I don't care about this stupid math lesson, I'm going to be cool.
I love that you had that thought when you were 6.
Well, yeah,
you were like, fuck this teacher, I'm going to be cool.
And I think the other thought I had was, obviously, I don't understand this math concept. So like my like only defense when like everyone else is getting attention because they understand it, I'm gonna get attention and not understand it and like stake out my position.
Well, and then so that's another really good point. You like in some situations you wouldn't understand what was going on, and you didn't know how to get to the point of understanding it by yourself. And so you're just trying to get attention. And then what happens? They send you to the principal's office. You're not learning the math lesson. You're not getting anything out of it.
No, I mean, honestly, I probably went home and my mom is like, F, now I got to teach this kid how to do long division because he wasn't paying attention.
Right. And so that's the problem. And especially for kids who, for a lot of kids, they're in a situation where school is the only kind of safe, predictable place for them. And if you suspend a kid or you expel a kid, you're basically just making them somebody else's problem, And if you let's say you have a kid, middle school, high school, doesn't matter, who is like getting in fights and he's being really violent and he's having these outbursts of anger and, he's like really disruptive. He's hurting people. Maybe he's hurting himself. He's like a danger. There's something serious going on there. And, I understand wanting to remove him from the community because you want to keep the community safe, but you're also just taking this person who has a serious problem and is hurting people and putting him in a different community where he's just going to hurt other people because you're not treating the root problem. So I think that's kind of the problem we're talking about here, is that when you have a kid who obviously has problems like the Parkland shooter did, and all you're doing is calling the cops on him or kicking him out of school or, taking him out of school, whatever, how can you ever expect the problem to be fixed? You know what I'm saying? If you're all you're doing is just kicking him around to be somebody else's problem.
Well, and I mean, I think a huge potentially part of the issue is that I feel like the goal of the teachers is not aligned with essentially what we're talking about here. If you're a teacher, the goal is get the lesson into as many children's heads as possible to maximize good test scores, which overall makes the school look good, which then helps you get funding. So when you have kind of like one or two bad kids, part of the instinct is lost cause. Right? It's we got to focus on the 98% of kids, and then their test scores will just it'll just, this rising tide will lift all boats. The other two kids, nothing we can do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's a problem with public schools not having the appropriate resources that they need. You know, if you are a teacher and you have 30 students, you literally don't have the time to devote to working with this one kid who, you know, maybe has like a really bad home life and like has some kind of problems that he really needs therapy for. There just aren't enough hours in the day for you to be able to do what you need to do to help them. And so, you know, it's not like, I'm not saying it's like the teacher's fault or the administrator's fault, because there's just not a lot that they can do with the resources and the time they have. But what I am saying is that schools need to be better equipped. You know, they need to have enough counselors who are, you know, really trained and really qualified, and like therapists on staff if needed, and, you know, special education teachers and aides who are well trained and know how to work with different types of behavior problems and different types of like emotional problems.
Yeah, I mean, schools just simply are not set up to solve these problems. So like I feel strongly that school is the place to begin to solve this issue in a really meaningful way. I think it's just not realistic to expect that parents that have to work so much just to even give their kid basic opportunities are also going to have the time to solve all these problems. Mm-hmm. Ideally, the place where your kid is most of the day and has to be legally is going to solve these problems, but we're not even close.
No, well, and that is the thing, is that at school, it's supposed to be just full of all of these professionals who are specifically trained to deal with this kind of thing. And you know, a lot of teachers are, and a lot of them are capable or would be capable if, you know, they were given the right circumstances and they were given like the resources and the time to address these things. But like you were saying, if all you can do as a teacher is just like get on to the next lesson because you need to just like check the boxes and say like these kids got this, like they learned it, anything that becomes a distraction you just want to take out of the equation. And so like that's a big thing. And like one thing about like suspension and expulsion that I think maybe a lot of people outside of education don't realize is that suspension and expulsion starts in preschool. Like these days, if you're in, well, because a lot of places don't have public preschool. And so if you're in a preschool, mostly it's a private type situation. Although even in public preschool, this is happening where, you know, kids, 3-year-old kids who are still learning how to be humans, you know, they don't necessarily always understand what's an appropriate behavior and what's not an appropriate behavior. And they're getting suspended and expelled from preschool for doing things that 3-year-olds are going to do. And especially in some areas where like life is really difficult and their parents are under a lot of stress and like maybe they're not getting enough food at home, or, you know, there's just like a lot of other things going on. They're not sleeping at night. You know, these little kids are displaying behaviors that are totally to be expected. You know, what you would normally expect a 3-year-old to act like in that situation. And instead of, you know, realizing that and working with them and saying like, okay, this is a problem that we can solve. Like we can work with this kid to help them, you know, regulate their emotions better and, you know, be able to, you know, interact appropriately with their peers. They're just saying, he's a problem, get him out of here.
Yeah, I mean, again, with public schools not even being set up to succeed in any way, you almost can't even blame them sometimes. It's just like they're not equipped to handle the problem. And I think a lot of that is, like you said, they don't have the appropriate number of specialists. And what we haven't touched on yet, I think, is just even the size of the class. Like if class sizes were half as small, you could dedicate a lot more one-on-one or more personalized attention, because really at the end of the day, solving a lot of these behavior issues involves mostly just talking, getting to understand someone, what's the source of the problem, then fixing that problem. Mm-hmm. And you can't get to that if you don't talk. Like we're not mind readers. But that ability to have a conversation is almost impossible in a classroom. You're literally just a vessel to receive the lecture. Mm-hmm. There's no dialogue.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true for most public schools these days, I think. I think that's very true.
Yeah, I mean, even in all the private schools I've been to, I would never say until high school was class size small enough that we had a dialogue. And even when we had a dialogue, it was about the lesson. There was no kind of period where I'm kind of working on my own in class and the teacher can come up to me and like ask how I'm doing. Really, the only time that happened was after school. There were a lot of times I would come in for help after school, and I would have like a really personal connection with the professor, and I would just be like, I don't understand this, and they would help me, and like I felt something good. But otherwise, it's just like I'm a body.
Class has a huge thing for me that I think is really important that I don't think enough people are talking about. I don't know why. I think to me, it seems like common sense that a teacher with fewer students can more effectively connect with and teach each student, you know?
Yeah, and that just brings us back to literally where we started, where there's not enough resources, and then amongst the right resources, there's not enough people with the right skill set to be able to spot the kids who have issues and be able to help them.
For sure. I think just to say one thing specifically about the Parkland shooter, ever since he was a little kid, he had like some kind of like emotional problems or something. People noticed, people said something, but nobody apparently did the thing that needed to be done, which was to say he has something going on with him. Like he needs some kind of like medical or like psychological help. And I think, I guess just my last point on that is that I think that points to a deeper problem in our society, which is that people don't care about each other. And like when there's a kid with a behavior problem, adults, this is a generalization, but adults see that kid as a problem, and like the whole kid is a problem, rather than that the kid has a problem, and that problem is treatable, and that with some like empathy and trying like problem solving and trying to work through it with him, you can treat the problem to the extent that the behavior problems go away.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what I thought you were going to say. Like, part of that's just America. Because in America, you mind your own business. If you see a kid with a behavior problem, your first thought is, not my problem.
Yeah.
That's someone else's problem. Thank God it's not my problem.
Right. Well, and that's the whole expulsion thing, is you make it someone else's problem. Right?
Yeah. And, like, obviously it's a horrible thing, but, like, that idea of community, no way, not here. No. It's that idea of I'm the individual or we're the family. Everyone else, that's their problem. Yeah. Don't get mired in someone else's business, because then you're going to bring their problems on our doorstep, and we don't want that. And
I do think that should be the role of the school, is for the people who are in the school and like the school community, even the students, but especially the teachers and the administrators and any other staff that works there and any other professionals that work there. I think it should be their job to be caring about the people in their community in that way, and saying like, this person clearly has something going on, and maybe like what they're doing is violent and hurting people, and it's like pissing me off, and it's like making me really angry, but it's not gonna fix anything to just get rid of them. Like it is our job as this school community to figure out what the problem is and figure out how to solve it to help this person so that they're not doing this anymore.
See, I think a bigger problem is all of what you said sounds great. That the school sees it as their problem to solve these issues. I don't think schools see it as their problem to solve these issues. And I think only what I mean by that is I think the broader idea of school is about getting these kids learned, getting these kids disciplined, teach them to obey so they can go work.
Yeah. And that is the unfortunate truth, is that like that's the macro goal of public school in this country, and probably even private school too. And like you'll get individual teachers and individual principals who really believe in like, the betterment of society and like, living a good life and being a good person, and like that's the purpose of education. But yeah, on a macro level, that is what education in the United States has become, is just turning children into workers.
Yeah, because like I just wrote down a couple things before we started talking about kind of what do kids need to kind of function well with others, I guess, for the lack of a better word. And like they need to feel like they belong, they need to feel like they have some control over lives, and they need to feel like they have a say in things. And school goes against that entirely. In school, it's just you have to obey. These are the rules. I remember we had to stand at the water fountain or something, and there was like this ritual with the water fountain where we had to be in a line.
Oh yeah.
And we had to be like boy girl on the line.
What?
It was some weird thing like that, or like the boys and the girls had some kind of order. Either there was like a pair of two lines, and like one's was boys, one's was girls, and we could only like drink for 3 seconds.
What a dumb rule.
Well, because I think people would sit at the fountain for like 10 seconds. It's like, well, they're freaking thirsty.
Exactly. Well, and that's it. It's all about like just controlling. And this is going to get into a bigger conversation because for people who don't know, I'm studying early childhood education right now. I'm getting my master's degree and I'm student teaching. Gets into a whole other problem that I have with schools, where so much of it is just about controlling literally everything that the child does, and if anything is taking too long for some reason, that's a huge problem. If anything takes too long, and so now there's a rule: only 3 seconds at the water fountain. Well, 4 seconds, get out.
Well, and it made me ideally like a really effective worker, because just like it's just 3 seconds at the water fountain today, but when you grow up it's like, don't worry, this assignment will only take me 1 hour. Like you start thinking about your time and how you can optimize the day. So like I'm such a good worker sometimes, because I'm like, you know what, from 8 to 9 I'm going to work on this, then I'm going to do a meeting from 9 to 10, then I'm going to work on this thing for 2 hours, and I'll have lunch for just 15 minutes at my desk, don't worry. And then I'm going to keep working. And it's just like I can feel like my teacher is seeing me now like, you done good, kid. Like,
oh my God.
3 seconds only.
No, it's true. And that actually is a really good point, because a lot of the time, these like little kids or like older kids who are getting suspended and expelled, it's for really dumb stuff. Like I remember in high school, I got detention once in high school because I was late to class or something, like too many times, however many times it was, because whatever, I'm still like that. But I was late to class X number of times, and that meant I got a detention. So I was like, okay, whatever. So then I was late to detention. Big surprise. And so the teacher who was doing detention was like, oh, you have to go sit in the office. Fine, whatever. What's the difference? Yeah. So I went to the office, and there was some issue going on, and the adult who was supposed to be in the office wasn't there. And so it was me and these like 3 other kids who also had detention. And so we were just sitting there, just like chit-chatting. It was great. And we were all like, oh, why'd you get detention? And this one kid was like, I was bouncing my leg in class. Oh no, it was like, why'd you get kicked out of detention? Because that's why we were there, because we were kicked out of detention. It's like, why'd you get kicked out? He was bouncing his leg, and it was annoying the teacher. And so he got kicked out of detention for that. And that happens so often, like what I see, even with little kids, where, they're just doing something that just happens to annoy the teacher, or it's something that's like technically against the rules, or it's like, well, it's not against the rules, but I don't want you to do that, so you're getting in trouble. And once you have a kid who that happens to a few times in a row, they start getting marked as like a problem kid. And then they start internalizing that, and they think, oh, I'm a problem kid, I'm just a bad kid. And then once you start thinking that, you're not going to get better, because how can you? You just think that you're bad. Yeah,
I mean, even when I was being the class clown, I remember the teacher calling me that.
Problem kid?
No, I think she called me the class clown.
Yeah, and that's your identity.
Dude, I felt great. I felt like...
You noticed.
I felt like some friggin' rebel. I'm like, that's right. I'm a thorn in your side.
Yes.
It's and like really, I've not evolved at all. You were talking about you getting detention. I'm like, that's badass. And then I got detention once, and I realized I couldn't remember why I got detention. I'm like, that's lame. Like, it'd be cool if I was doing something like really bad. I think I was just late to class, but like even when I got detention, I was like, sweet, this would be a good story someday. And it wasn't. It was very boring.
Well, that's what they.
Yeah,
that's what they want it to be. Mine ended up being a pretty good story. It was fun. But yeah, no, like so much of the problem is that there are a lot of arbitrary rules in school. A lot of them, have no rhyme or reason, and kids know that. And so they break them because they know they're stupid, but then they still get in trouble anyway. And those are the little things, but you can still get expelled for the little things. And then, what are you going to do? You're not able to learn just because of some stupid rule that you broke. And then even for more serious things, like if there's a kid with serious behavior problems, it's because there's something deeper going on. And basically, if if that kid just keeps getting disciplined and disciplined and disciplined without the underlying issue ever being addressed, the kid's going to get disciplined out of school, and he's either going to end up, you know, hurting somebody or hurting himself, or, you know, getting into something where he gets arrested and goes to jail, or, you know, just maybe if he has a mental health problem, he could that could just start deteriorating more and more, and then he can't take care of himself, you know? So like what are your end goals here, you know, in if you have a kid with serious problems, in just disciplining them or like expelling them? You're not doing anybody any favors. All you're doing is, again, just making it not your problem. So basically, you know, we're not experts, but, you know, what it seems to us from this situation is that for, you know, in order to hopefully help prevent things like the Parkland shooting happening again, one thing that we need to do is figure out how to work with kids who show obvious signs of some kind of you know, emotional disturbance or mental health problem or behavior problem, whatever. We need to figure out how to work with them without just making them somebody else's problem. And, you know, that probably is going to involve a lot greater financial investment in schools, you know, getting them staffed appropriately, getting them trained appropriately. But I think it also has a lot to do with how we, you know, feel about each other and how we think about each other and just caring about each other and not seeing other people who, you know, aren't behaving in ways that you think are appropriate as problems, just thinking about them more as a person who has some kind of problem or is going through something or, you know, has made mistakes and, you know, could potentially, with help, you know, get better.
Agreed.
So.
No, I have nothing else to add beyond I'm still trying to become cool. So seriously, any suggestions, please let me know.
I'll think about it. Talk about it next time.
So our final segment of the podcast is called Watch List. In this segment, we recommend one TV show or movie that's flying beneath the radar, but it's definitely worth checking out. Maury, what are we recommending people check out this week?
So there's this short series on Netflix called Abstract, and each episode focuses on a different artist or, you know, sort of designer or architect, something like that, who is notable for, you know, making like big contributions to their chosen field. The first episode is this abstract artist who's done all these New Yorker covers, and he's like really cool. And they span a lot of different media. There's an architect, there's a stage designer. Yeah,
I mean, they even have the guy from Nike who designed most of the early Air Jordans.
Yeah, almost all the Air Jordans.
Yeah, and that's what I think I like most about this show, where there are a couple episodes I was simply less interested just in the medium or in the particular individual, but I think the number one thing I took away is obviously that there are so many talented people in the world, but just so many different ways that you can express yourself. And so it's really worth it watching the whole series, but you can definitely skip around too if there are a couple different mediums that you're most interested in.
I do think it's very inspirational. There's one episode about the guy who designs cars, and I think it's inspirational in the sense that if you have like some weird interest, even if it's not something that you think you can make a career out of, it's always worth pursuing it. You know, it's always worth like pursuing something that you're genuinely passionate about, or any sort of creative pursuit that you're interested in, just for the sake of it. You know, there's all these people like they're because they pursued these weird little things that they were interested in, they're able to create these really cool, like amazing, beautiful things. And, you know, this guy's like designing cars of the future, and he's, you know, this other guy's designing the Air Jordans, and it's like this other guy's designing these futuristic, you know, apartment buildings with gardens and stuff. And it, I don't know, I think it is really cool and interesting to see these really talented people in all these different fields and kind of like hear their stories and how they came to be there, and just feeling like, you know, I could do something cool one day too.
No, totally. It's a great show. Check it out.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it for us. If you enjoy this podcast, search for FWD, that's forward, in iTunes or your favorite podcast app to subscribe, or you can subscribe on SoundCloud.
Thank you so much for listening. If you ever have any questions, thoughts, or topic suggestions, you can always shoot us an email at forwardpodcast@gmail.com. That's FWDpodcast@gmail.com. Goodbye for now.
Bye.